Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTP World. In today's show, of course, we'll be taking a look at the situation in Pakistan in the aftermath of the floods that have devastated the country. More than 1/3 of the country is, of course, underwater, and we know that millions of people have been affected, an approximate 33 million people. And there have been many others who have lost their lives, who've gotten injured, who've been displaced, whose livestock has been destroyed. We've also known, of course, that there has been a lot of damage to crops, to cultivated land, and, of course, to children as well. There is, of course, a lot of measures that are underway at the moment, including rescue and relief efforts that have been going on for quite some time now. We also know that our international partners have been supporting in terms of aid and other forms of assistance. The UN Secretary General has also formulated an appeal of $160 billion for this particular issue. And then, of course, there is other measures that is also taking place locally as well, in which we have different institutions taking place along with individuals and other NGOs and different bodies who are doing their bit. This, of course, still means that there is a lot that is needed at the moment. There is a lot of consequence that people are talking about, far-reaching and long-term, both economic and in terms of food security and otherwise as well. And the kind of damage and loss that Pakistan would have to face. The initial assessment says $10 billion, but of course, this number is bound to change once we have more in-depth analysis of the situation. There is, of course, the larger concern of people's lives and health and rehabilitation as well, and the way that Pakistan is going to be able to bounce back from this. For this, of course, we have been looking towards our international partners for help, and we know, of course, that there has been a lot of assistance coming in from various countries, including the US, which has also now deployed a disaster resistance response team under US aid, which is going to be acting in various departments in terms of whatever is needed in the flood rescue and relief operations, including nutrition, access to clean drinking water, sanitation, and many other needs as well. They will also be taking a look at assessing the damage and identifying which are the priority needs, and of course also coordinating with the government of Pakistan and their response team. So we will be taking a look at the kind of measures that this particular team will take, and then of course various other forms of assistance that international partners have provided, and what all needs to be done now and what can be expected from the countries around the world. That is going to be our first segment. Our second segment is going to take a look at what has been said, unfortunately, by the PTI leadership in a rally in Faisalabad, which has been taken notice of by the Pakistan Army and ISPR as well, who have released a statement saying that they are aghast at the defamatory and uncalled for statement about the senior leadership of Pakistan Army by Chairman PTI during this particular rally, in which Chairman PTI has talked about how the current government and the different political parties involved in the PTM are not going to put forward an army chief who is patriotic, because any patriotic army chief would not be someone that they would want, since of course what the alleged statements coming in from the PTI chairman have been and are that the current government is corrupt, and because they need to protect that, they'll put in place somebody who is also corrupt and not patriotic. This, of course, was the implications of what has been said, and we have, of course, seen that the Pakistan Army has expressed its displeasure, its disappointment over what has been said, and has reiterated, of course, its own stance to the Constitution, to the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, to the immense amount of sacrifices that they have continued and still are continuing to pay. And we, of course, have seen that in the past as well, certain statements and remarks have come in from the PTI leader and its leadership in general. We have also seen that explanations have been given in the aftermath of the statement, claiming that in fact what was said was against the political leadership and their inability to choose someone, and that is nothing to do with the Pakistan Army, and they haven't really criticized that, and then they extend full support to the Pakistan Army. So the political legitimacy of the government was put into question and not the Pakistan Army. But of course, this is something which can be countered in terms of what has been heard and what has been said and what the Pakistan Army and the ISPR has expressed displeasure over. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show as well. For this and more, of course, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Batafi, and I've also been joined online for our first segment by Dr. Danish Mustafa, professor in critical geography, King's College London, and also by Michael Kugelman, who's a Deputy Director Asia Program. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today. Let me start with you, Michael. You have, of course, taken a close look at what has been going on in Pakistan with regards to its flood situation and the kind of international response that we have been getting, and of course that Pakistan has needed. We have seen help coming in from various parts of the world. We have seen help coming in from the US as well. But there has been a lot of talk in terms of whether or not the scale of the damage is being understood by the people internationally as well. There have been parallels and references made as to what really is the number 33 million, how much people does it signify, and the comparisons have been drawn to populations of different countries as well. When we take a look at the kind of international help and response that we're getting, the UN Secretary General has also remarked that the world needs to stop sleepwalking towards this crisis as well. Do you think that the kind of help and response that we've been seeing from international partners is proportionate to the kind of damage Pakistan is witnessing at the moment?
Well, first of all, Sana, thanks for having me as always. And I should say, first of all, my heart goes out to Pakistan and what it's experiencing now. It's simply heartbreaking. So yes, you're right. I mean, we are starting to see a fair amount of aid come in. By my last account, there had been at least a dozen countries that had pledged support, and some of that support is starting to enter Pakistan, especially through a new humanitarian air corridor that was opened up in recent days, which has facilitated the ability to bring in food supplies, basic household items, and so on. And of course, the EU and the UN and other multilateral groups have also pledged support. And of course, indeed, the UN Secretary General is saying all the right things to bring attention to just how catastrophic the damage is. And I believe that he actually plans to travel to Pakistan later this week, which is
on the 9th.
But saying all that said, I'm struck how different the response has been this time around compared to 2000, when, of course, as you know, there were also catastrophic floods, though not as bad as these, seemingly. Mm-hmm. And the response was much more quick and much more intense, I would argue, back in 2010. I looked at this just the other day. Within a few weeks after the floods had emerged in 2010, you had about 60 countries that had pledged support. It's a different time now.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a different time now. For one thing, I think donor fatigue is a big issue. The international community has already been grappling with humanitarian crises in Ukraine and Afghanistan, among other places. And also, you've had these shocks to the global economy, supply line shocks from the pandemic, skyrocketing commodity costs from the war in Ukraine. So I think that has made many more reluctant to be willing to pledge in a big way right now.
And that is a good point, Michael. Let me ask you the same question in a different way. We understand that the governments all over the world have their resource constraints, but regarding the awareness of this kind of catastrophe, do you think that there's enough awareness in the Western capitals all over the country, all over those countries, or there isn't? If there is not, what can Pakistan do to raise awareness? Because in democracies, people's choices and opinion also matter. Is it not true?
No, I think there is a lot of awareness. There's been a significant amount of international media coverage of this emergency, not as much as some would want, but certainly there's been that. And there have been a lot of statements of solidarity and support from presidents and prime ministers around the world. And just looking at Washington, there's going to be a very large senior delegation, interagency delegation from the U.S. government going to Pakistan to discuss the flood and other matters. The U.S. military has already sent an assessment team in there, as you would likely know.
And lawmakers have also come. Yeah. And lawmakers also have come.
Yes, Michael, can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I was just adding to what you were saying that U.S. lawmakers are also here. They also visited the flood affected areas. So there is a response from the state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Indeed, there's a congressional delegation that's there now. And again, we've heard parliamentarians in other countries, especially in the West, bringing attention to this catastrophe. So I think that in terms of the global response, it's not an issue of lack of awareness. And I think there's also a strong awareness across the world that this is not a first-time thing, and that Pakistan has suffered from these types of natural disaster catastrophes so many times in the past.
Right, absolutely. Let me also speak to Dr. Danish regarding that, of course. And when we talk about these particular floods, this, of course, has been stated as unprecedented. But we were talking in the same terms back in 2010 as well, because then that was unprecedented. When we take a look at the kind of issues that Pakistan faces, or the potential floods or other disasters that seem to have a likely occurrence every year, we keep talking about it, and we see them in some form or the other, perhaps not at a scale such as this, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of understanding in terms of what sort of a flood is there going to be, what sort of a damage there is going to be, what sort of a need in terms of response there is to be. Is that an issue of planning or policy, or putting emphasis more on the kind of infrastructure that's needed, or is it that we don't really have any data assessment or any studies in terms of the changing patterns of the climate as well?
Dr. Saab, you'll have to unmute yourself, sir. I think your voice is not reaching us.
That's because I was muted. That's the word of 2021. Thank you so much for inviting me at this important discussion with my friend Michael. To answer your question, first of all, I think it's a problem of understanding, and Pakistan is not unique in those terms. You've had an unprecedented flood this year. You've had about 20 unprecedented floods in the past 70, 80 years. There were floods in 1929, which were unprecedented. There were floods in 1958, which were unprecedented. There were floods in 1973 that were unprecedented. There were floods in 1988 that were unprecedented. In 92, they were unprecedented. In 2010, they were unprecedented. And in 2022, we have more unprecedented floods. So the point is that the problem is that we refuse to look back and learn from all the unprecedented stuff that we've had. In 2013, I wrote a flood protection plan for UNDP, which had the approval of the government of Pakistan. And in there, I had emphasized to them that with floods, you do not need more infrastructure. One of the problems that you have in Pakistan is there's too much infrastructure, as a matter of fact. The two things that the Pakistan government has always needed to prioritize and has not prioritized is, first of all, drainage, draining the floods, facilitating the drainage of floods. And second of all, early warning. Now, I will come to the second one first. With regard to early warning, I've always emphasized that Pakistan has 80 weather stations. Nepal alone has 243. And I think where Michael is right now in Washington, there are about 2,000 weather stations. And one of the things I'd emphasized to the Pakistan Met Department, even at the time, and have been emphasizing ever since, there's absolutely no reason why there cannot be a weather station in every high school in Pakistan, for example. So first of all, data collection. Second part is, I was talking to Assistant Commissioner Badin back in 2013, I think, again it was. And he said in 2011, he got a fax from the central government saying that there is some sort of a 80% chance of 120 millimeters of rain in the next 72 hours. Now, I am trained as a climatologist. I am familiar with climatology, but frankly, that particular message means absolutely nothing to me. And the assistant commissioner said to me that it meant nothing to him either. So basically what he did was passed it on to the Patwaris and what have you, and that's where it ended. And you have some of the most catastrophic floods in 2011, if you recall, in Badin district at the time. So the problem with the Met Department in Pakistan in particular, and overall, first of all, it is very centralized. I mean, federal government seems to think that it can do everything. And unless you have messaging, warning messaging, which actually gets to the people, and I can go through the whole chain through which the early warning happens in Pakistan, and in fact does not happen in Pakistan, what you will learn is that what you need to do is communicate to the people in vernacular, in the terms that they understand, actionable terms as to what is coming their way. Right. A warning is issued, the warning goes to the chief secretary, from chief secretary to the divisional commissioner, to the deputy commissioner, to the assistant commissioner, to the Patwari, and by that time, all hell is broken loose, and it doesn't even get there most of the times. Right. So it's a chain of communication and everything that we need to work on.
That is very, insightful, Dr. Saab. Let me ask you, earlier you mentioned that there is drainage problem as well, and we have seen that in south of the country, both in Sindh and Balochistan, there seems to be this problem which always exacerbates the crisis. This time also, a month ago, when flooding started in Balochistan, we saw the kind of fixtures, the kind of buildings or structures that were there seemed ancient. And it seems that while in one part of the country we keep on, especially in north, we keep on upgrading stuff, in the south we might not be doing it. Do you have any explanation for why that would be?
See, the problem is that floods by themselves are not a problem. Pakistan would not exist if it weren't for the flood ecology of the Indus Basin, right? We have lived with floods as a civilization for 6,000 to 7,000 years, right? Our prosperity, our agriculture, everything depends upon the flood pulses of the Indus Basin, right? Everything depends upon the monsoon. So they themselves are not a bad thing. It is our actions that make it bad in the first instance. And that's where we need to focus. For the longest time, for 6,000 years, we in Pakistan, our culture knew that you never stand in the way of water. You always were aware of drainage. I mean, Mughals built empires before, canals and irrigation systems. Prior to that, there were sophisticated irrigation systems all over the country. All of those irrigation systems were based upon the understanding that we must not interrupt the drainage of the water. Then the British came in and taught us new engineering and everything else, and we are absolutely enthralled with everything that the West does. So surely if they did it, we must do it again. And we must continue doing it, even though we know it doesn't work. And that's where when rains happen, for example, in Sindh, right now, the biggest problem is not so much inundation. It's not so much that people are actually drowning. What is going to happen now is that you're going to have waterborne diseases. People are sitting on streets, on roadsides. And when the water comes, where it wants to drain, you have built a road. Where it wants to drain, there's a canal berm. Where it wants to drain, there is a railway line. And there is no provision for drainage to happen. And drainage is not even a priority. Why doesn't every assistant commissioner have access to drainage pumps in case they don't want to build culverts or anything to facilitate drainage? These are very common sense things. They don't require a lot of money. They don't need billions of dollars. What they need is simple common sense to make sure.
Right, absolutely. And this is something, Michael, that you've also written about, and you talked about how there needs to be a lot of emphasis locally also in terms of infrastructure development and planning. And you also mentioned in your article something interesting, that it's not just the fact that we keep saying that Pakistan contributes less than 1% to the global emissions, but the fact that Pakistan is not a global polluter is an issue of the scale of its economy or the size of its economy, rather than the fact that this is a principled policy. And this is what you mentioned there. And it's important to notice that as well, because when we take a look at what needs to be done or the kind of responsibility and accountability that exists at home, it's important for us to not just hide ourselves under the fact that we're contributing less than 1% globally. When we talk about these efforts, you also mentioned that perhaps international partners need to contribute in terms of infrastructure development as well. But we've seen this help coming in the aftermath of this disaster. And of course, climate change or issues of climate change are impacting and have been impacting Pakistan for a long time. We'll be doing that for quite some time. Even this particular flood and the kind of damage that we're going to be seeing and the rehabilitation that is required would last almost about 5 years, what the estimates say, maybe longer. Will we be able to rely on international help on infrastructure development irrespective of a flood-like situation?
And Michael, let me also add to this question, because we keep on hearing these voices demanding climatic, reparations, and then also these appeals that all Pakistan's debt be forgiven. But it kind of reminds me 2016 onwards that in America, the kind of political changes that came with Donald Trump, there was this streak of not selfishness, but me first, and that forget about the consequences. We have to first look at our own interest. Do you think that that kind of situation and international politics, all these demands or guilt trips, are they going to work? Michael.
Michael, can you hear us?
Michael.
I believe Michael is unable to hear us at the moment. Dr. Danish, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right. Would you like to respond to that, please?
Well, I mean, I can't really speak to the international scenario because my interest is typically at the local scale. But there were a lot of questions there. Could you ask me one again so that I could respond to that?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even remember.
Sure. I'll take you to my question. My initial question was emerging from what you were earlier discussing in terms of what really needs to be done locally and domestically. But when we talk about that, that hasn't happened over the years, and we kind of look at that sort of help coming in terms of infrastructure development from international partners as well. But that only comes in the aftermath of this flood, not otherwise. Can we really expect the kind of help that we need in terms of infrastructure development without a flood-like situation existing in Pakistan, in terms of whether there's not a flood, but there's of course the potential or possibility of a flood occurring? Will international partners also come in and develop Pakistan just because it is prone to climate change issues?
Madam, no one in the world is going to come and develop Pakistan. Only Pakistan can develop Pakistan. And when it comes to developing Pakistan, one does not need more infrastructure. That's the message I'm trying to say. They're not going to come here and make warning messages in Sindhi for you. They're not going to make warning messages which are comprehensible to women in Balochistan. And when you're talking about help, when I have worked in flood relief, one of the biggest needs in flood situations is for women to have pots and pans. Very unglamorous, nothing frightfully exciting, nothing that the United States can give you. They need pulses, they need food for their children. That is the immediate need right now. Is United States or Germany going to send you chane ki dal? I mean, that's just not going to happen. Reality is that we need to develop our local level capacities to know what the local needs are and where they are needed and get it to them as soon as possible. Now, no government in the world can do that for you. We have to do it for ourselves. So, right. You know, these pie in the sky kind of comes. Infrastructure development. Why do you need infrastructure development? What infrastructure do you need for drainage? All you need to do is not stand in the way of the water and know what the flow of the water is. Any farmer in Kambar Shadad Court can tell you which way the water is supposed to flow. You don't need a consultant from USAID to tell you that. But if only we were to listen to them. We don't want to listen to them. We keep wanting to listen to, you know, people coming from Germany, from Britain, from here, from there. And that is our Achilles heel.
No, that is true, Dr. Saab. And as we move forward in the program, we are going to try to bargain your suggestions as well. We are going to look into the possible application of this as well, because there seem to be these concerns that keep on coming, that so many lives, their livelihoods have been destroyed. So whether the world community can help Pakistan or not. Well, let us go back to Michael. Michael is back with us.
Yes, Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I lost my connection. I'm back.
Yeah.
No problem. Michael, earlier we were talking about infrastructure development, and Dr. Danish is of the view that we don't really need help in terms of infrastructure development. It's quite an obvious solution. But you have written differently in terms of the kind of needs that are required and the kind of help that international partners can give Pakistan in this. Of course, you also argue that there is accountability at home as well, just because Pakistan is a global polluter of less than 1% to carbon emissions does not mean that this is something because of its principal policy, but rather because of the size of its economy. And that's interesting, because that means there's a lot of accountability at home that we seem to ignore. But when we talk about particularly infrastructure development, do you really think that in terms of what is needed, Pakistan is aware and has full capacity to develop it without the help of international partners?
And Michael, before you actually answer that, let me take you back to 2016, when in the US election, Donald Trump was running. And we remember that his supporters used to say that you keep on telling us about Rwanda, other places which are badly impacted, but you cannot guilt us for whatever is happening there. We have to first look at America, and it has to be America first. That kind of changed the, direction of international relations, and everybody has been speaking in more or less the same kind of realpolitik language for quite some time. Do you think in that kind of a situation, these appeals that we keep on hearing about climate-related reparations, or for that matter, forgiving a country's debt, whether they are going to find any ear that is, supporting of these ideas?
Right, so I could understand the argument of those that support the idea of climate reparations, but I simply don't see it as very practical, and certainly not on a political level. I mean, just looking here in Washington, I mean, I cannot imagine the U.S. Congress agreeing to some type of new law that will allow for the U.S. to send billions in reparations related to climate change to Pakistan. For so many reasons, it's just something that's not going to happen. And of course, climate change, even though in Pakistan and so many other countries, it's a clear and present issue, climate change is still a very polarizing issue globally. There are plenty of people that think that the threat is overplayed. There are plenty of people that still deny it, and this is all very unfortunate. But that, to me, suggests that this idea of reparations, it's just not it's not practical. It's not a good idea. I do think there is a role for the international community, for sure, and I think that if you look at the issue of just maintenance of existing infrastructure, which has long been a challenge in Pakistan when it comes to water-related infrastructure. There certainly, I think, is a role for the international community to play in terms of providing financing for the better upkeep of existing infrastructure and/or to enable it to be stronger and more foolproof to withstand some of the effects of climate-induced events. And I think in terms of technical support, that's also, I think, an area where the international community can be very helpful, particularly on the issue of early warning systems. I think that's an area where the international community could weigh in. And I know that we've heard some inspiring stories from these current floods, such as the fact that mosques in a number of flood-affected areas have issued calls for evacuations through their own resources. And that's great. But that's not enough at the end of the day. But clearly there has to be a balance found between what the international community does and Pakistan taking responsibility for its own huge challenge. And indeed, I mean, we could talk about the many years of ecological governance failures, which I know that Danish has written. He's literally written the book on this stuff. There's something to be said for that. But I think at the same time, there's something to be said for what the international community to do, what it should do. But at the end of the day, to be very blunt, Pakistan is going to be left alone to fend for itself. I mean, after the media coverage subsides, after the immediate assistance from the international community has been provided, Pakistan is going to have to face this huge challenge on its own, just as it has in the past with all these other catastrophic weather events that Danish had laid out earlier. So that speaks to the issue of Pakistan having to put itself in a position where it could make these ecological governance issues a top policy priority. But clearly, it's not there yet.
Absolutely, Michael. It is good to be realistic and live in the real world. Even if it is a broken world, one has to actually work with that. But there are certain issues that one has to look at. First of all, Pakistan is cash-strapped as we speak. Secondly, Pakistan is in an IMF program which is quite stringent, quite strict. In that kind of a situation, this kind of loss would actually mean that these people who have been displaced actually remain displaced, and we don't have the kind of capacity to help people out. And while this is going on, the prices of electricity, as per the agreement with IMF, and the fuel prices also are continuously jacked up. So how do you actually propose that Pakistan does this in such a climate?
Certainly would welcome Danish's view on this, but I think, again, at this point at least, the focus has to be in the immediate term. And we know that there's still millions of people that have not received any aid and really need it, really need help. This is where the international community can step up with with basic food assistance, blankets, supplies, and also conceivably, potentially, with helping getting those that are stranded to positions of safety. I think that has to be the immediate priority. But you're right. I mean, this is why I think we should all be so worried that Pakistan, even before this flood, had been facing a really serious economic crisis at the same time that there is incredible levels of political polarization, which has made things even more difficult for the state to respond. And what I really worry about beyond the immediate term is the food crisis. I mean, we know that we'd already seen
it is going to be immense, yeah. It is going to be immense. With your permission, Sana, I want to actually go back to Dr. Danish, and I have the same question that I was actually pointing to, the war gaming bit. Dr. Saab, you were talking about two essential solutions. One, early warning system. Two, drainage system, or provision of better drainage system in the country. Now the question is, if we take the first part first and we talk about the way it is handled, early warning system of course has to be there, and yet there are people who still will be displaced because of the flooding. So what do we do with that? Is there any great plan or a grand plan to readjust population, or to decide whether if a city is really in the way of historic flooding, there should be some kind of permanent displacement, uprooting and resettling somewhere, or something else? And while we speak, sir, at this moment, thousands of houses are underwater. They have been destroyed. 5,000 kilometers of Pakistan's road has been swept away. So do you think that Pakistan will essentially not need any international help at all in rebuilding life in these financial tricky times?
And also, Dr. Danish, add to that what we earlier were discussing with Michael regarding Pakistan's ability to do something considering its economic situation as well.
Yeah.
Again, I think I'd point you to the distinction that Michael very helpfully pointed out. One is long-term reconstruction, right? Yeah. So for the long-term reconstruction is a separate conversation from immediate relief, right? And which is again a separate conversation, not exactly a separate, they're related. And there's also the question of what to do for the next one, because there is going to be a next one, right? And hopefully we won't call that unprecedented, hopefully. So there are three questions over here. So in terms of drainage, to come to the first question, you don't have to build a drainage system. Nature has done it for you. Nature has done it for you. That's what nature does. There is natural drainage. Allow the natural drainage to do its job. Don't build stupid projects like RBOD, right bank outfall drain, which has been under construction 25 years and nothing has happened. Millions were sunk into left bank outfall drain, nothing happened. Stop building these nonsensical infrastructural projects. Get out of that habit. That's the first thing I would say. Let nature take its course. Second thing, again, I say, for 6,000 years, we've been living with floods. Go out to the floodplain, go in southern Punjab, go in Sindh. Every household that can afford it tends to build it on a higher platform so that the floods will come. It is part of their calculation, and the floods would not hurt the basic infrastructure that is there. We need to facilitate local level adjustments to floods. These people know floods, they have lived with floods. We need to harvest their wisdom. We need to talk to them instead of talking at them. That is our biggest problem. Lastly, again, and no donor in the world, not Michael, not me, can teach you how to do that, to talk to your own people and listen to them and take advantage of their wisdom.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much. Yes, continue.
Yeah. And when it comes to the
almost at the end of our time, but go ahead, Dr. Danish.
How much foreign aid do you need? What do you need foreign aid for? When it comes to relief, to build a road, do you not have engineers who can build a road? And even if when you build the road, how many roads do you need? I mean, you're building motorways, you're building roads everywhere, you're doing all of that. You need to make fewer roads and make them more sensibly. There are all sorts of ways in which, I mean, if you build it, they will come. That's the sort of mindset that we've been in for the past 25 years.
Right. And these are very valid and very important recommendations, and thank you very much for that insight, Dr. Danish and Michael, for joining us, and of course being a part of the debate and talking to us regarding the situation. And it's extremely important, of course, for us to be able to do something about the people and actually take action, as Dr. Danish was suggesting. If you want to add something?
Can I just slip in a couple of observations regarding this 3,000 long history? I'm reminded of my paper 20 years ago on Indus Valley Civilization's collapse. And the fact is that while we actually had many theories, in the end, it was about bad irrigation practices. So in 3,000 years, I don't think that even then everything was hunky-dory. Today, the problem is not only us. It is also the climate change, the way it is happening. And then, of course, economic crisis as well, because the government of Pakistan doesn't have the kind of fiscal space. So every bit of help counts, and that is most welcome.
Absolutely. And of course, right now, Pakistan is in utmost need of that help, and we need to understand the current realities of the situation as well. And goes without saying that Pakistan also needs to take accountability for its people. When we talk about what is happening on the domestic and political front, there is, of course, the kind of statements that we've been hearing from the PTI leadership in the past as well. But what has now come forward is something that the Pakistan Army and ISPR has released a statement regarding talking about how unfortunate and how disappointed disappointing it is to hear the PTI leadership talk about the senior leadership of Pakistan Army and also imply that somehow this particular post is not held by somebody who's patriotic and will not be held by somebody who's patriotic because of the political government that is in place, which according to the PTI leadership is corrupt, and so will choose somebody who is not going to be patriotic to the country so that they are safe. This is what has been alleged by the PTI leadership in a recent rally in Faisalabad, which of course has been talked against and condemned by the different political parties, including the Prime Minister and of course the Pakistan Army as well. For this, we have been joined by Brigadier retired Haris Nawaz, who's also a political analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Haris Nawaz, for being with us and being a part of the debate. Of course, we've been hearing statements coming in from the PTI leadership regarding different institutions for quite some time now. But when we take a look at what has recently been said, how do you weigh this in terms of what has been said earlier, and then the kind of responses that we've been hearing in terms of the explanations that seem to be coming out from the PTI leadership, which seems also to be a recurring habit from PTI leadership, saying something and then explaining it in a way that it wasn't understood correctly. Is that really the case here? Do you think that what has been said has been mistaken, or do you think that what has been said is very clear in its implications?
Absolutely, it is not at all good. It is uncalled for, disappointing, and particularly to make the senior leadership controversial, then to give them discredit, and then make the promotion of Chief Army Staff very controversial. Whereas the hallmark of Pakistan Army is that we have a very strict promotion and a merit procedure in Pakistan, and that is why our army is rated one of the best professional armies in the world. And our senior leadership is taken all over the world as their advisors. So that speaks that they are the professional, and there is no doubt about it. And the merit and the fairness is such that in Pakistan Inter-Service Selection Board, if a Sepoi's son goes and a general's son goes, the general's son might be rejected if he is not on merit, and if the Sepoi's son is on merit, he will be selected. So you can well imagine the fairness in the selection system. That's all. We are the best of professionals, and our leadership, really we feel proud of that.
Right, absolutely. And Brigadier Haris, I'm glad you spoke about merit because I want to further talk about that. Farooq, this is of course what has been said by the PTI leadership, that the appointment needs to be on merit, and of course that is given considering of course it's an important post in the country. But what has also been said is that the current government and the political parties forming the government will not be appointing somebody based on merit. Is that to say that whoever is appointed as the new Chief of Army Staff will not be on merit just because they have been appointed by the current government? Is that what the PTI leadership intends
right,
to say?
And Sana, thank you very much for including me in this discussion as well, because it is important. By implication, what you are saying, that holds true. Okay. What Imran Khan Sahab was saying, actually it gave me that impression as well. I kept on hearing the statement repeatedly, and unfortunately that was the implication of what he was saying. And I earlier thought that perhaps because of the moment when he was speaking, it might be so that he just uttered something that he couldn't take back. But I don't think it was without deliberation, and that is really sad. My problem at this moment is all politicians of Pakistan have been doing it for past many decades, and they think that somehow picking and choosing somebody from the available list of contenders among generals for the Chief of Army Staff will somehow change the political dynamics of the country, right? That never happens. First of all, any general that actually rises to the top, his first commitment is to the country. Then, of course, it is to the institution. And that never changes, Sana. This is very important to understand. No matter who you actually bring in, your own cousin, in the end, he is going to be the army chief of the country, and he is going to look at these two very important priorities. The second aspect that is very important is today, every journal that sits, 3-star journal and other journals, or 4-star journal for that matter, they all have actually been part of the war that we have been fighting for past 20 years. So this is a battle-hardened army, and these officials, all of them, are people who have actually served this country by putting their own lives in grave danger.
Absolutely.
So you cannot have any kind of purity test for them, especially if you are a politician whose hallmark is basically helping us win a tournament, right? So that is one aspect that is very important to understand. The third thing that I want to talk about is the war is not over. We still are fighting. Even now, as we speak, our soldiers have embraced martyrdom because they were fighting terrorists in South Waziristan, right? Not Waziristan, I'm sorry. And because of that, they have actually sacrificed their lives. Think about their morale. And I'm not merely talking about generals or brigadiers. I'm talking about ordinary sepoys as well. Their emotional, and their morale at this moment, how do they feel? Because in Pakistan Army, command, leadership or chain of command is very important. So what are you telling them? You're actually misguiding them or demoralizing them. So this was really a sad comment. And today I saw Fawad Chaudhry Saab putting in heroic effort to actually put a lipstick on this pig, but unfortunately that didn't work, and his heroic effort might be there, but it didn't work. I think Imran Khan Sahab will have to publicly take the statement back.
Well, I hope so he does, because we haven't really seen any precedent of that. But you're right when you talk about what Fawad Sahab has earlier done, because that's what it amounts to. Brigadier Haris, when we talk about the kind of impact that this is going to have, of course, it has been said about the senior leadership. But as Farooq was mentioning, this is something that impacts the entire institution, right down to the last soldier. And when we talk about this, of course, this is an international impact also. Of course, our army institution is something sacred both within the country as well. And then, of course, in the national interest of Pakistan, when it comes to the international community, it's also an important institution. And so it hurts the institution when elements inside the country are going to be saying irresponsible or damaging statements. How big of an impact do you think this particular statement is? Because there has been content coming in from India as well, from other parts of the world as well, commenting on this particular statement.
Sana, the whole world recognizes the professionalism of Pakistan Army. And then, of course, our senior leadership. Rather, they are asked advisors from Pakistan senior military leadership. And they feel very happy because we have a battle-hardened army. Our leadership, they lead from the front. They have shown their professionalism by eliminating terrorism from all over the country, which 51 countries in the NATO, they could not do in Afghanistan. And that's what is the thing, and we have to boost around it. Second thing is, it caused very serious effects. But Imran Khan and all other political leadership must understand that our military is very well disciplined. Whether it is a sepoy or a corps commander, they all look towards Chief Army Staff for directions and operation readiness. One thing that should be very, very clear about it. Second, the way he has spoken, that the only Chief of Staff, Chief Army Staff who file certain cases against PDM and they arrest them because of their lot of corruption will be the only patriot. It is absolutely funny statement. All senior officers, I would say all officers, all our army is patriotic, and they follow the Constitution of Pakistan. They are under the sitting federal government. So there is no doubt about it. But any Chief Army Staff, when he becomes, he has to ensure the interest of Pakistan military, the territorial boundaries of Pakistan, and safeguard the protection of the people of Pakistan. And then, of course, the people of Pakistan and military, they are meshed together. And if you try to dissect or create a wedge between them, that is going to be very, very serious implication. And that is
right.
what
I also want to talk about another implication, Brigadier Haris. Of course, the statement also refers to the fact that the choice of the Chief Army Staff is going to be based on the fact that the person is going to somehow protect the political leadership or different political parties from their corrupt cases. That's the implication. But what's being really implied here is that the army, the Chief of Army Staff or the army itself will have stakes or does have stakes or does actually interfere or intervene in the political dynamics of the country. That's a big statement to make.
Absolutely wrong. You see, we've already said, Army, that we are not apolitical. When a Chief Army Staff takes over his command, he has to do all legal things. Military training, military operational readiness, military operational intelligence, and the task assigned by the federal government, limiting yourself within the constitution. That is the role of army, and that will be always implemented. What happened? General Musharraf has done it. General Zia, then of course General Bajwa. The point is, when you take over, you see the interests of the country. You look after the interests of the Pakistan military, and then you have to see externally and internally, and the whole world respect military. You know, General Bajwa has been moving around internationally with the political world, political leaders, with military to military contacts. Then, of course, with Americans, with the European countries, everybody he is doing out of the way voluntarily talking about Pakistan interests. So that is what I say. You should not say like this, particularly when you have been an ex-Prime Minister of Pakistan. Your words should be very measured. Your response should be very measured. Second thing is, I strongly feel that this is the time when he should render unconditional apology, or he should feel regret what he has said, and he should be very, very open. There is nothing to feel bad about it. Second, of course, if that doesn't happen, then the federal government is there. Military has shown their concern, their observation. They are very upset about it. Now it is the responsibility of the federal government, government of Pakistan, to take proper punitive action against him. So that
right, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. But Farooq, of course, another implication here is also the kind of impact it's going to have on the voters of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf as well. Of course, there's a large population of blind followers. Perhaps that's true for every political party, but there's a lot of popularity that the PTI leadership enjoys at the moment. And so it seems that whatever they say seems to be the gospel's truth for them. And so it seems that any Chief of Army Staff that is going to be appointed by the current political setup is going to be deemed or assumed as unpatriotic or not in favor of Pakistan, as the senior leadership has implied. How significant do you think, or how long-term or far-reaching the consequences of this is?
Well, I don't think it is going to have any consequences whatsoever, because this is sheer populism. All political parties in Pakistan have been making statements which were unbecoming of their stature. So this time, again, this is bigger than most of them, but still it is, I mean, people of Pakistan are no fools, right? When you say that the army chief can cover this up or cover that up, first of all, in what capacity? In Pakistan, we have this problem with our discourse that we lack all nuances, right? Usually, we try to see everyone, every journal, through the prism of 4 political journals who took over the country, right? Ayub Khan, Yahya Khan, Ziaul Haq, and General Musharraf. They were 4 outliers. They were not, you know, part of the overall situation or example of situation, right? Most journals had the opportunities to take over. They never did, right? And repeatedly politicians kept on going there and asking them to take over. Imran Khan Saab's own urge or demand was, why are you not stopping this change of government? Remember that he kept on saying, he kept on referring to them as neutrals, right? And kept on saying, why are you doing this? Stop it, right? In that kind of a state of mind, one forgets that an army chief doesn't have the political or legal capacity to forgive anybody's corruption. He doesn't have any way to actually pick or choose next prime minister. In that state of mind or state of situation, you have to realize that whatever is being said is playing to the gallery. Unfortunately, this is a dangerous one. It is causing a lot of dissension in the country, and that is bad. I think the system knows how to correct it. But in coming days, whosoever comes, and remember, you're talking about pre-elections. Imran Khan was talking about pre-elections. Let me talk about another thing, ideology. There is this tendency to say that this is a conservative journal, this is a liberal journal. With due respect, when a journal becomes army chief, he is an army chief of Pakistan Army. And he, as I said earlier, his loyalty is to the country and to the institution. So ideology becomes a very secondary issue. His choices, priorities, don't matter that much.
Right. Thank you very much, Brigadier Haris Nawaz, for joining us, and Farooq Qaddafi for being with us. And of course, we hope that we have more responsible statements coming in, especially from former prime ministers. But of course, that remains to be seen. Thank you so much for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.
Wow, how